Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Good evening, my name is Harvey and I'm an alcoholic. I'm feeling a little weird. I've been sick. I've had a virus for the last couple of weeks. I'm getting hot flashes. So if I don't know, maybe whatever, but I'm feeling a little weird and I'm tired, so I had 3 cups of coffee. So somewhere in the middle of my talk, if I start speaking quicker, you'll know the caffeine has kicked in. And I'm also feeling guilty. I want to thank Mike for asking me to leave. I just want to make sure the alarm's not set. I've always wanted to do that. I've always wanted to set an alarm on a speaker for the heck of it, but I'm feeling guilty. I took my little 6-month-old golden retriever puppy in to be fixed yesterday. So I picked her up today, and she was just excited to see me. She was very happy to see me, and I put her in the car, and I put her on the seat next to me, and she's just darling. And she looked up at me with those eyes and that look on her face like, what did you do to me? I just sat there in the parking lot and tried to explain it to her. Not too well, I might add, but I tried to explain it. It's kind of like the same problem I had when I tried to explain sex to my son, you know. It didn't work then either. Anyway, I'll tell you in a general way what I used to be like, what happened, and what I'm like today. I won't get too specific because we don't have that much time. I've got a 4-hour pitch in me, somewhere deep inside. And I spoke up at this retreat in the Tehachapi Mountains, and a friend of mine asked me to speak, and I said, what happens? He said, well, we'll all be in this room, and you know, and you can talk as long as you want. And I said, great, Frank, I've got this 4-hour pitch inside of me. And he says, that's wonderful, go ahead and give it. And I said, really? He says, absolutely, we leave after an hour, but you can talk for as long as you want, you know. Anyway, I don't remember much as a kid because I've blocked most of that out, other than the fact that I was always full of fear. And my biggest fear was getting out of bed in the morning because I knew that I was a fraud, and I knew that everybody would find that out. And that carried well into my adulthood and well into my sobriety, for that matter. And with me, my fear is always manifested in rage, so I was always angry. Always full of rage, and always on edge, always uneasy. So you had this fearful, angry kid, nervous all the time, you know. And 2 weeks after my 12th birthday, I got drunk for the very first time. I am not a Chapter 3 type of alcoholic. When I find something I like, I stick with it. I got drunk on Jack Daniels, and I drank Jack for the next 27 years. I love Jack Daniels. Absolutely love. I still love the aroma of Jack Daniels. When I had 9 months of sobriety, I explored the possibility of starting a men's aftershave lotion in the aroma of Jack. And my sponsor pointed out that not everybody felt that closeness to Jack that I did, you know. And then he informed me that he was a Scotch drinker, and I almost changed sponsors because it was very important to relate to specific things in those days. Anyway, I believe I was an alcoholic from the gate. I heard a guy at an AA meeting talking about that invisible line in alcoholism. We've all heard about that invisible line. He said that he felt that his invisible line were his lips. And I think that's the way it was with me too. As soon as it crossed my lips, I think I was an alcoholic. I have never had a drink in my life. I've never had a hit off a joint. I've never done a line of cocaine. I've never done 1 5 milligram of Valium, and I've never done 1 chocolate eclair. You know, it's just the way it is. I'm a pig on everything. When I start, get out of my way. Patty and I were in a car accident 7.5 years ago, and we were hurt. We were in a lot of pain, and what I took for pain medication were custard-filled chocolate eclairs. That was my pain medication, and Patty had brownies. Patties with brownies, and I was custard-filled chocolate eclairs. And 20 pounds later, we had to go on a diet, but sure felt good. Anyway, so I got drunk for the first time, and I'll tell you what it did. It didn't take away the fear, but what it did was it took away the rage, and it took away the uneasiness. I was not an angry alcoholic. It was an absolutely incredible thing for me. I started smoking dope when I was about 15, and I basically went through college drinking and smoking dope. Now, I'm a product of the 60s also, but the 60s are a little different for me. See, I was in college in the early 60s. The early 60s were not the 60s. The 60s really didn't start until 1967, the Summer of Love. The early 60s were just like the 50s. Very lame, very square. It was very weird. There was only one other guy in my fraternity house that smoked dope. And if we wanted to smoke a joint, we had to leave the house, go around the block and smoke a joint and take a beer with us, because God forbid anybody would find out that we were smoking dope, because if they had, we would have been thrown out of the fraternity, because drugs were, terrible for you. Except all the uppers everybody was taking to study or whatever, but that was different. I never took an upper to study, never. I took it for other important things, but never to study. But basically, that's how I went through college. And I won't bore you with a long drunk-a-log. I'm going to tell you what a typical day was like for me, because I was boring. I basically did the same thing day after day after day. And what I did was I'd found this drug at this point that got me out of bed in the morning. Actually, it sprung me out of bed in the morning, and I'd pack my nose with this stuff, and it would, and as you can tell, my nose is kind of large, so a lot went up it, houses and cars and stuff like that. But that would get me out of bed in the morning and showered and dressed, and that would get me downstairs to my morning cup of coffee. And with my morning cup of coffee, I discovered God's second greatest gift after Jack Daniels. It was a little pill called Val Release. It's off the market, so I'm going to tell you about it, but it's gone. So if anybody wants to go out and try it, it's no longer there. But what this drug was it kept 5 milligrams of Valium in your body on a 24-hour time release basis. This was a sweet pill, just a very sweet pill. And I would take 8 or 9 of those with my morning cup of coffee. And then I would take 4 Fiorinol with codeine number 4s for the headache I knew was coming on. And I'd go to work. And I worked on the Sunset Strip at the time. I was a business manager in the entertainment industry, and I worked up on the old Sunset Strip, which was a lot of fun in those days. And I'd stay in my office every day until 11:30, and then at 11:30 I'd walk the 183 steps from my front door to the front door of my favorite watering hole, which was a restaurant and bar called the Cock and Bull up there. And I loved that place. Loved that place. I was there every day from 11:30 to 1:30. I had my own stool, third from the end. I'd be back again around 3:30, and I'd be there from 3:30 to 5, and then I'd get back there again around 7:30, and I'd stay there for however long it took that night, whatever the definition of it was. I never knew. Sometimes it was an hour, and sometimes it was closing. It was because once I started drinking like that, I couldn't predict my behavior. The maintenance drinking during the day was fine, because I knew that at a certain time, and most of the times I didn't overshoot that mark. When I'd get there at 11:30, I'd be back in my office by 1. When I'd get there at 3:30, I'd be back in my office at 5. Most days. It didn't happen all the time. But when I got up there at 7:30, that was my no hold drinking. There wasn't a time limit on there for me, and then I could never predict my behavior. It's just the way it went, And I'll tell you what my ambition was. We had a guy that had the number 1 stool, an old character actor by the name of Frank Ferguson, and I break Frank's anonymity all the time because he never got sober, so the hell with him, when Frank died, they put a little brass plaque on the bar, and it said something like, "Here drank Frank," and and I figured that when I die, they'd find something to rhyme with Harv or Harvey and give me a brass plaque, and that was what I thought was going to happen. And what actually happened was that Patty and I went to the closing lunch for the Cock and Bull. We closed that place. We were sober, and we closed that place. It was hysterical. Hundreds of people are in there crying, just bawling, you know, like babies, because their home was being closed. I mean, it was amazing. All the guys that I used to drink with were still there, you know, and then as they've moved around to different places, they've all been closed, but they were all, well, not all of them, because a lot of them have died off, but they were all there, and it was a very funny experience. Anyway, that's what I did, and I did that for 12 and a half years. And then after 12 and a half years, I started to abuse alcohol and drugs. You see, up until that point, that was what all of us look for, that right prescription, that right combination of everything that gets us to a point where we can get out of bed in the morning without that fear, that we can function productively in this society, and that we can do something. This allowed me to get out of bed. It allowed me to drive into work. It allowed me to go into my office. It allowed me to build my business. And it allowed me to be somewhat successful in my business. I never really know how successful I was. You know, when I first got sober, I used to tell people I was an extremely successful business manager, because I was still a legend in my own mind. And as I've stayed sober longer, I've kind of gotten realistic about everything, and I really have no idea how successful. I mean, I was an up-and-comer maybe, you know, but I don't know how successful I was. I made some money for some years, but who knows how good I was, or how good I would have become, or anything like that. I have no clue. The truth of the matter is, without the alcohol and the drugs, there's no way I would have been able to do it from day one anyway. So I needed that. But after 12 and a half years, something clicked, and I went nuts, and I started to abuse everything, and double and triple and quadruple what I was doing, and I just went crazy. And I went literally on a 5.5-year run that was manic at its best, you know. And what happened was that I stopped functioning, and I started losing my business, and I started losing my clients, and I started losing my income, but I still had my expenses. So without giving it a second thought, I stole some money from some clients, a considerable sum of money from some clients. Didn't even think about it. Just ripped them off, you know. All my life I'd prided myself on my honesty and my integrity, and without, you know, and I'd been offered kickbacks for years, and I'd never taken anything. But when I needed money, when I was loaded and I needed money, I just took it. Just took it, you know. And I didn't do it very wisely, and I got caught. And it took a couple of years for them to catch me, and it broke in the papers and in the LA Times. It hit the front page of the LA Times on the morning of my daughter's bat mitzvah, if you know what that is. It's like a Jewish confirmation. I had to go to this party with 400 of my ex-wife's nearest and dearest friends and try to function, you know, and I really don't remember much, except that I do remember that was an emotional bottom for me that I'll never forget. I don't remember much of the day. And by that time, I had literally lost everything I had worked for, all of the things that I thought were important to me, the cars, the house, the money in my pocket, the ability to do anything I wanted at any time. I'd lost all that. But I walked into this temple for this thing, and I saw something in people's eyes I'd never seen before, and that was disgust and revulsion. And the way that people looked at me just absolutely shocked me, and I'll never forget that. I can close my eyes and see certain people looking at me that way today. Absolutely today. And it was incredible. It's absolutely incredible. That was my bottom. I didn't get sober because I never had a problem with alcohol and drugs. Never had a problem. My problem were always people. If they just left me alone, I'd be fine. Just leave me alone. I've always felt that way. Always felt that way. A friend of mine asked me when I knew I had a problem with alcohol and drugs, and I told her 3 days after I quit, because that's what happened. Anyway, it was almost a year to the day later that I was in temple on a holiday called Yom Kippur, which is the holiest day in the Jewish religion. It is the day that we are there asking God to atone for our sins. And God knew I needed to be there for about 3 months, you know, but it's a one-day gig, and that's what he was getting. And we sang this prayer that I got very emotional over, and I started to cry, and I turned to my girlfriend and my 2 kids, and I said, "Excuse me, I have to go to the bathroom." And I walked into the bathroom, and I pulled out this little emergency stash of cocaine I used to carry with me for the many emergencies that might occur during a day, you know. And I was about to do a couple of toots, and I said, "Why am I doing this?" And I threw it out. I just threw it out. At that point, I'd been a daily drinker and drug user for 18 years. and I threw it out. I have no idea why. I have never had remorse before. I had never said tomorrow will be different. I was never one of those kinds of people. I'd never taken a solemn oath. As I say, I'm not the chapter 3 type of alcoholic. I never knew that what I was doing was a problem. I always thought that people were my problem, and I threw it out. That was September the 17th, 1983, and in the Jewish calendar, the holidays float, and tomorrow's Yom Kippur again. And I'll go to temple. I go to temple in the morning in Yom Kippur, and it's always wonderful for me when I sing that same prayer, that I sang that morning right before I got sober, and I get to do it again tomorrow morning, and it's just it's an incredible feeling for me. Anyway, I just stopped, and I didn't say anything to anybody. I went and I sat down and didn't say anything to anybody. And I 3 days later, I started to go crazy. I started to feel like I had to jump out of my skin. And I called this guy that I knew, and he suggested I go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And for some reason or other, I have no idea why I did. I don't know why I took his advice. And I went to this meeting, and it was my very first meeting. It was called the Whatever Meeting. It was on Sunset Boulevard at the old IATSE Union Hall. It was the craziest damn meeting I've ever been to in my life. Still the craziest meeting I've ever been to in my life. This was before there were all the hospital programs and drug recovery programs and everything, and everybody was kicking everything in that meeting. It was nuts. Chairs were flying. I mean, anger was coming out. Knives were coming out. Every week the cops were called, The only way you knew anybody was staying sober was you'd look around the room and see who was getting fat. If they were getting fat, they were probably staying sober. I mean, it was just nuts. And I ran into a guy there that I'd known off and on for about 15 years named Jim Loeb. And Jim is the reason that I came to my second meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Jim pulled out what I think is the single most important piece of literature that Alcoholics Anonymous has, and that was a meeting directory. And he circled the meeting for the next night, and he said, Harv, if you meet me at this meeting tomorrow night, we'll go out for dinner afterwards. Because you see, I had been to my A meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. The guy suggested I go to A meeting. I was at my A meeting. I didn't see anything that you guys had that I wanted. I did not see the light in anybody's eyes. I did not get sober and walk arm in arm with God down the road of happy destiny. That's not what's happened to me, I never felt like that. I was angry. And Jim invited me for dinner. And that's the reason that I went to my second meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. When I had 8 months of sobriety, Jim killed himself, blew his brains out, never having gotten more than 30 days of sobriety. And I don't know why 14 years later I'm sober and Jim's dead. I have no idea behind that. I refuse to believe that God loved me more than he loved him. I won't believe in a God like that. I grew up with that kind of a God. I have to believe that God loves us all and shows us this program, and then it's up to us to work hard, to work our tails off to stay sober, because it's not easy to stay sober. It's hard to stay sober. It's un-American to stay sober when you think about it. This is a drug and alcohol society. I went to the dentist. I had a root canal a few months ago. I'm walking out. The guy hands me a piece of paper. I said, "What's this?" He said, "A prescription for Vicodin." I said, "How many?" He said, 30. I said, "Don't give me a taste." And I handed it back to him, I mean, 30? It's hard to stay sober. I had to get antibiotics for this thing from my doctor. I couldn't believe it. I had to go through a receptionist, a nurse twice, and finally I had to talk to the damn doctor. I got him on the phone. I said, I could have called you for morphine, gotten it easier than these antibiotics. And he said, "Yeah, that's true. If you were in pain, I'd have prescribed that." I mean, it's just, it's just the way it is. It's the way our society is. It's difficult to do the work to stay sober. So, anyway, I'll tell you how angry, I'll tell you what a changed person I was. Prior to getting sober, I used to carry an Ingram 9mm machine pistol with a 47-shot clip and a silencer in the car with me at all times. Well, I knew they were out there and I had to be prepared because they could attack at any time, And I only pulled that gun out once. Somebody cut me off at a gas pump. A gas station took my pump. And we all know that's a capital offense. And I reached under the seat and I pulled out baby, which is what I used to call it, and I slapped that clip in and I jacked it up and I pointed it at him. And he did the only thing he could have done was he got out of there. because I don't know what I would have done had he not. You know, at that point I'd been up driving around for about 3 weeks and I needed gas. And it's just the way it was, you know. Well, I no longer carried the gun. Actually, the district attorney had that gun, but that's one of those specific stories we won't go into. It's pretty funny, but we won't go into it. Instead, I carried a little Beretta, 8 in the clip, 1 in the chamber, cocked, hammer back, safety on, right here in a little waist holster. First 4.5 months of me going to meetings, I had the Beretta. I had Baby. I also called it Baby. I had that little Beretta right here with me. I never once pulled it out at a meeting. I want to assure you that. I reached for it a lot of times, you know. Every now and then I used to wear a sport coat. I'd pull back the coat and show it to you, you know, so you wouldn't get too close. Because there were some strange people at these meetings, you know. I got a sponsor after a few months. Great guy. Wonderful guy. Just a wonderful guy. Perfect guy for me. Told me he wanted me to do a few things. I said, okay. He said, I want you to go to the mirror every morning and say good morning to yourself. The stupidest thing in the world. Stupidest thing in the world. I do it. I still do it. Every morning I go to the mirror, I say, good morning, Harvey. I look at myself and I say, damn fool. What are you doing this for? And I smile. And it puts a smile on my face every morning. It's a stupid thing, but I do. He said, I want you to bound out of bed in the morning. I want you to make it so you cannot get back into it. I don't want you to stay into bed. And I thought, how does this guy know? How does this guy know about my fear? And 3 days later, we went out to lunch, and he shared with me, and he told me, he said, you know, Harvey, I want to tell you what my biggest fear is. And I said, what's that, Bill? And he said, my biggest fear is getting out of bed in the morning, that I know that I'm a fraud, and I know that everybody's going to find that out, and I'm deathly afraid of that. And I was shocked, because I honestly believed I was the only one in the world that felt like that. When they say that Alcoholics Anonymous is simply one drunk talking to another, I can't tell you how I relate to that. It's so important to me. He's a great guy. I said to him one time, I said, how long do I got to go to those damn meetings for? You know, and he didn't give me that pat answer, oh, until you want to. He didn't say that. He said, 1.5 years. I said, 1.5 years? He said, 1.5 years. I said, I can hang for that, you know. Now, it never dawned on me to ask him why he had, I think, 3.5 or 4 years of sobriety at the time and was still going to meetings, you know. What did I know? I read in my first inventory 35 pages of people that had wronged me, you know. He gave me a big hug and he said, keep coming back, Harv, we'll do this again. And I said, what do you mean we'll do this again? This was a great inventory. I didn't feel relieved like you did or part of this group when I did that inventory. I wonder why. But I sure got rid of some justifiable anger and explained it to my sponsor. Excuse me, when I had 17 months of sobriety, I finally had to go to court to find out what they were going to do with me. Now, we'd been delaying this case for 2.5 years, and in the meantime, which I got sober, and so we go to court. The judge has like 50 letters from people in the program attesting to what a great guy I'd become. You know, there were 10 or 12 people that came to court with me that day willing to testify on my behalf if called upon. And the judge looked at me and he said, you know, Harvey, I want to congratulate you on your obviously sincere attempt to rehabilitate yourself, and I hope that after this hearing is concluded that you continue along that path. And I thought, wasn't that sweet? And then he banged that gavel down and sentenced me to 5 years in state penitentiary. And away I went. They just took me right away. Boom. Put me back in this little holding cell right behind the court. And I'm sitting in there and I'm just scared to death and madder than hell. And I said the Serenity Prayer, and that didn't help. And I said this little prayer of the Shema Yisrael, which is a Hebrew prayer, and that didn't help. Then I said to myself, if I ever hear somebody at an AA meeting say that their worst day of sobriety is better than their best day of using, I'm going to rip out their larynx, you know. And that anger just kind of stayed with me for a while. For the first time in my sobriety, I'm sober now 17 months, I took the second half of the first step. I was finally convinced that my life was unmanageable. I wasn't convinced of that before. I think that's a big step for me. It was for me. Big one for me. It was easy to take the first half of the first step. I took that in 1976, 7 years before I got sober. I was sitting at the bar at the Cock and Bull, and some guy lifted up his glass and said, you know, I'm powerless over this stuff. I can't stop drinking. And I said, so what? Me too, but who cares? We're having too much fun. Well, at that point, we'd been sitting at the bar for 7 hours, you know, we're having a ball, you know. And But the second half, because I believe for me, in order for me to live productively in our society, it's just a matter of simple surrenders on a daily basis. That's just what I have to do. I have to surrender my will on a daily basis. Because things don't happen the way that I want them to. 3 months later, they brought me back down from the penitentiary back into that fool's courtroom. He's no longer sweet in my eyes. And they brought me back into that fool's courtroom, and he knocked the year off my sentence, so I had a net of 4. And in California in those days, he did roughly half time. I did 22 months in state penitentiary and 5.5 months in a work furlough house. I honestly believe it's the reason that I'm alive today and the reason I'm sober. No doubt in my mind. I needed a place to go to make the amends that I'd never be able to make. I needed a place to go to knock out my omnipotence and most of my arrogance. I needed a place to go where people could show me that I was capable and worthy of being loved. I used to get 20 to 25 letters a week from people in this program. Every week I had people coming down to visit me. Every few weeks I had 2 friends of mine. They used to pack their car full of newcomers and say, "You guys think you got it bad? Let's go visit Harv," you know. Down they'd come, and these poor fools would walk out on that visiting yard scared to death, you know, and they'd say, "Hey, Harv, tell them what it's like," and I did, you know, but I believe all that stuff could have been accomplished in about a month, you know, but they weren't asking my opinion, so I got it. I got to tell you how lame I was. I'd never been arrested before. At that point, I was 40 years old. I had no clue to what was going on. I'm sitting in LA County Jail waiting to catch the chain of the joint. Doesn't that sound cool? Catch the chain of the joint. And I had to keep on correcting everybody. They kept on mispronouncing my name. My name is Harvey, and they kept on referring to me as Homie. And I said, "My name's not Homie, it's Harvey, man," you know, until finally some guy called me Homer. And I said, "You know, no Jew in the history of mankind's ever been called Homer," and then I got it, you know. It's all right, homie, you know. We caught the chain of the joint, which is what they do is they handcuff a bunch of fools to a long chain, toss their butts on a bus, and drive them the hour to Chino. They didn't do that with me, though. I was on crutches. I'd had my leg operated on, and they didn't want to put this fat old Jew back there. See, I'd put on 80 pounds when I got sober. They didn't want to put this fat old, remember I told you the only way we knew anybody was staying sober was who got fat. Well, I'll tell you what happened. Instead of drinking and doing all those drugs, I was doing a gallon of Dreyer's ice cream every 3 days. You know, without a spoon. I just dipped my face in it, you know. Anyway, but I had my leg operated on. I was on crutches. So what they did was they put me in this little room on the bus, which I thought was very sweet of them. Until I found out later it was the high-powered room. It's where they put all the murderers, you know. So for about 3 weeks, everybody thought I was some sort of Jewish serial killer, you know. So they left me alone. I'll tell you a couple of things that happened to me. The very first night I was in, the only time I've ever heard God's voice, I was in this they have different institutions within the compound, and I was in this one institution called Central, and it's just like what you've seen on television, like Sing Sing. Follow the yellow line, it's one-man cells, and the bar is closed, you know. 2 months later, I'd given my eye teeth for a one-man cell, but I didn't know that at the time. I'm lying on this bunk, and I'm like in the fetal position, and I'm screaming in my head, "Why have you done this to me? Why have you done this to me?" It's, you know, I mean, I'm sober a year and a half. I'm trying to be a good person. I'm trying to be of service. I'm trying to do all these things. And what I heard clear as a bell was, "It's your turn." That's what I heard. Now, the very next thing that I heard was the guy in the next cell yelling up, "Veronica! Veronica!" And I thought, I'm going nuts. I'm going absolutely crazy, because this is a men's prison, and it's a cell block 6 tiers up, and from like way up in 5th or 6th tier, I hear, "Yeah, baby." Now, I met Veronica the next morning. Very strange. So some very strange people in this place. They moved me over to this other yard, and I'm sitting in the reception center in this other yard, and this guy walks up to me and he says, "Is your name Harvey Glass?" And I always felt a little weird when somebody would say that to me, and I looked at him and I said, "Yeah." And he said, introduced himself, and he said that a friend of his wrote him a letter from L.A. about me, that I'd be coming down, and he was the secretary of the AA meeting that they had on the yard, and he wanted to let me know when it was, and that I needed any literature, and he got me a big book, and told me they had one meeting a week on that yard, and told me about that, and it was incredible. It was absolutely incredible. It was a yard that we're on. They put 2,500 violent sociopaths in one small place, see who can get along, and then they decide where to send them. I mean, it's very strange, you know. I have no clue. I'd been down about a month. I was lying on my bunk one day, and I felt the bunk shake, and I looked up, and I knew that life as I had lived it was gone forever. Standing over me was this huge guy, had his shirt off, buffed up. Everybody in the joint worked out with weights. Not me, but everybody else did. And he's buffed up, and he's got the three-leaf clover over his right breast, which signifies the Aryan Brotherhood. He's got lightning bolts tattooed all over his body. He's got Oildale tattooed over his belly button. Oildale's this little city outside of Bakersfield. It's the only city in California that has its own Ku Klux Klan clubhouse, you know. He's got SWP for Supreme White Power tattooed under his belly button. He looks down at me, and I look up at him, and I detect what I think is a little glint of love in his eye, you know. And he says to me, he says, "Is your name Harvela?" Now, Harvela is what my mother calls me. If you've ever heard the definition of a Jewish mother, multiply it 1,000-fold, and that's my mom. And I looked at this guy and I said, "My name's Harvey. Where did you get Harvela?" And he said, "Well, your mother told my mother I'm supposed to talk to you." Now, here's what had happened. My mother ran into this guy's mother and grandmother on the visiting yard. And as is her wont, she talks to everybody, you know. And she says, "What's your son in for?" And they said, "Alcohol and drugs." And she said, "Isn't that a coincidence? So is my Harvela." Now, there's 6,000 guys in the compound. My mom thinks we're the only two with a problem, you know, but what does she know? She's never been down there for a kid before. So she said, "But you ought to have your son talk to my Harvela, because my Harvela's clean and sober for a year and a half, and maybe he can help your boy." And that's what he was coming to talk to me about, was about sobriety, you know. I'd like to tell you he stayed sober. He didn't, but it was a strange guy. He really wasn't much different than us, other than he was. I was 40, Jewish, upper middle class, accountant. He was 34-year-old street junkie, been coming to joint since he was 14. He was head of the Aryan Brotherhood in the southern prisons. Not prison, but prisons. More raw power in one man's hands I've ever seen, and I hope to God I ever see again. I never want to see that again. You know, this guy was one bad dude. But sobered up, he wasn't much different than we were. You know, 3 years after I got out, I went back into the penitentiary for a banquet. If you can believe this, because a homeboy of mine, my best friend in the joint, was back in one more time. He's now sober almost eight years, but he had to go back in 3 more times to verify that he was in fact an alcoholic and a drug addict, you know, and an armed robber for that matter. And so another homeboy and I, a guy that I'd helped get sober, who has stayed sober and is now sober for 12 years, he and I went back in to see, so homeboy and I went in to see homie, you know how it is, you know, and I know what to say now. And they actually let us walk onto the yard, which was real strange. And we got there, and there were like 40 guys that I'd been down with that were all waiting to say hey to me. You know, nobody says hi, it's all hey. It's hey. They used to call me Had Money, you know. Hey, Had Money? Stay down with your bad self, whatever the hell that means. I never knew what that meant, you know. And they had told me this guy got out one more time, and you know, he wasn't going to stay sober, and it's just the way it is, you know. Somebody asked me last week, we were talking, no, actually, it was yesterday. It was a client of mine yesterday. We were talking about it, and she'd known I'd gone to the penitentiary, and she said, "I can't believe that the fear that you had to go through in going in." And I said to her that the fear going in was absolutely nothing like the fear coming out. That was more frightening than going in. It scared me. It scared to death. I was scared to death when I got out because I had no idea what was going to happen. I had no idea if Patty and I were going to be able to pick up on our relationship. I had no idea how people were going to look at me and treat me. Was I going to be able to rebuild my business? How the meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous were going to be? Because I went to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous again and was freaked because you guys were so animated. You know, I'd stand at the back of the room with my back to the wall. I couldn't handle it, you know. I was scared to death. And what happens to me is when I'm scared, I'm angry. And I was full of rage at one more time, you know. And what happened, I'd been out of prison for a year and a half. I had 5 years of sobriety. I was 44 years old. And I came home from a meeting one night. Patty had gone back to school and was back in school. And I came home from a meeting one night, and I sat on the couch, and I realized I had just gone through my very first full day without any fear. It was the most incredible feeling that I'd ever gone through at that point. You know, a whole day without any fear. Now, the very next day I was back into it. But today, for the most part, I live fear-free. And if it rears its ugly head, I know how to get out of it. You know, I couldn't talk up here. I think Faye said the same thing about talking. I never raised my hand as a newcomer. I never took a 30-day or a 60-day chip. I took one 90-day chip and one 9-month chip, and I did not take a cake for my first year, which I've always regretted. I didn't take cake for my first year because I was too afraid to stand up here. I couldn't talk. I couldn't say a word, you know. And it's incredible, the power of Alcoholics Anonymous and what the people and the love have done. The way I got through that anger was because of people. Because people would let me call them and rage at them and tell me they would tell me they love me. And they got me into service. And in service, I found out that I had some worth. And because I had some worth, I started to get some self-worth. And because I got some self-worth, I started to get some self-respect. You know, it's just what happened with me. I guess it was about 8 years ago, my best friend who was gay called to tell us that his lover was dying of AIDS, was in the hospital and was dying of AIDS. And Patty and I, over the next 6 months, the last 6 months of his life, we spent a lot of time with the two of them and being supportive and just being friends, you know, which is what you do. And we watched Hector die, and that weekend, he passed away on a Friday, and we spent the weekend with Michael, and Monday was the funeral, and we went to the funeral and came back to the house, and we got ready to leave that night, and Michael came up to us and he gave me a hug, and he said, "You know, Harvey, I couldn't have gone through this without you. You are the kindest, gentlest, most loving, caring, sensitive man that I know, and I love you for it." And I was like shocked, because I don't see myself that way at all, at all. But I'll tell you what I do see. When I got sober 14 years ago, 95% of my actions were inappropriate. And today, 95% of my actions are appropriate. It's just my actions. You know, there's a saying in Alcoholics Anonymous that you can't think your way into right actions, but you can act your way into right thinking. Not me. I just act my way into right actions. My thought process still sucks. If some of you knew what I was thinking right now, you'd throw me out of here, you know? I mean, it's just the way it is. But it doesn't make any difference, because I don't act on my thoughts, and it makes no difference what my thoughts are, because you don't have to know what my thoughts are. All you're going to see are what my actions are. You know, because of the way that Hector died, and the courage and the strength and the dignity that he showed in his last days of his life and into his death, it gave me the courage and the strength to make my last two major amends. One of them was to one of my clients that I had stolen money from. There were three. Two got paid off by insurance and one did not, and this was this guy. And I had a phone number for him. And I called him up and I told him who it was, and he was just thrilled to hear from me, you know. And he says, "What do you want?" And I said, "I need a mailing address for you." And he said, "Why is that?" And I said, "Because I belong to a 12-step program of recovery, and one of the steps of that program is we make moral and financial amends, and I want to start sending you a check." I said, "I'll never be able to repay you, but I'll send you a check every month for the rest of my life." And he said, "Harvey, I've never wanted any money from you. All I've ever wanted was an apology." Which I thought was very sweet. It wasn't true, but it was very sweet, you know? Because I remember a letter being read in open court about welding the door shut after I got in, you know? But I wasn't going to remind him. I just apologized, you know, I'm no dummy. And then he said something that blew me away. He said, "I want to tell you something." And I said, "What's that?" He said, "A friend of mine heard you speak at a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I want you to know that I'm proud of you." And I just lost it. I just started to cry. Because I couldn't believe that somebody could have that kind of compassion to me. You know, I've learned how to be compassionate by people being compassionate to me. I've learned how to be forgiving by people forgiving me. I've learned how to love by people loving me. And I've learned how to be a friend by people befriending me. I knew none of that when I got sober. Absolutely none of that. You know, my last major amends was to the Internal Revenue Service. I owed them $3.5 million. You know, well, I'm an accountant, you know, so why file? And I didn't for 10 years. 10 or 11? Yeah, 10 or 11. So I didn't file. They were upset. And I sure as heck wasn't going to pay him. You know, I needed the money. So I filed what's called an offer in compromise. And I literally offered them millicents on the dollar because I didn't have the financial credibility in this town to make that money. I no longer had that obsession to make that kind of money because it takes an obsession to make that kind of money. And when Hector died, I reprioritized my life. It became more important to me who I was rather than what I was. I didn't want it to say on my tombstone, "Here lies Harvey Glass, a great accountant." I just didn't feel that was important, you know? And so I made this offer in compromise, which they promptly rejected. And I appealed it. I know how to do that. And I appealed it. It took them about 8 months to hear the appeal. And the night before I was going down, Patty asked me what I was going to say to them. And I said, you know, honey, I have no idea. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk in there, and in a general way, I'm going to tell them what I used to be like, what happened, and what I'm like today, because I don't know what else to do. And that's what I did. I said, can I take a few minutes and tell you about myself? And he said, sure. And I did this little 20-minute spiel, you know, and he looked at me and he said, you know, Harvey, you're an inspiration, and if everything checks out, we're going to have a deal. Now, I knew everything was going to check out. The reason that I knew that everything was going to check out was I did something a little bit different. I told the truth. You know, I just told the truth. There is no gray area with me any longer. There used to be gray area. There used to be a lot of yes buts. There isn't any of that anymore. It either is or it isn't. Because once I start rationalizing, once I start talking about gray area, I'm in trouble. That's for me. I don't know about you, but that's the way it is for me. So I just have to be there. Now, obviously, I don't walk up to people and say, hey, you look like death, you know, although I did that to a guy not too long ago. But for the most part, I don't go up and purposely try to hurt anybody by telling them the truth. But when in this case, I told the truth. And they did their investigation, and it took another 8 or 9 months. And on the morning of February the 26th, and the reason I know it's February 26th is because that's the anniversary of the day I was sentenced to the penitentiary. And I'm sitting at my desk. I work at home at my office in my house at my desk with my morning cup of coffee looking at my mugshot. Go figure, I was feeling sorry for myself or something. And the phone rings, and it's this guy, Hank from the IRS, and he said, Harv, I just want you to know that everything has been approved, the paperwork's in the mail. As soon as you get it, you can start making your payments. And I just was amazed. You know, it's a 60-month deal, 60-month deal. On March 1st, 1996, I made payment number 60. It's over with. It's over with. There is light at the end of the tunnel, and sometimes it's the light at the end of the tunnel, not an oncoming train, you know. Took everything in me not to write yippee on that last check. I'm telling you, everything in me. I got a checking account this year. First time in probably 16 years I had a checking account. I was excited. I felt like I was 16 years old when I got my first one. Only I was more excited this time than I was then. You know, I mean, it was incredible. It was a great feeling for me. It's a wonderful feeling for me to do that. A couple of other things that have happened. I was, when I first got out, I wanted to rebuild my tax practice, which I've managed to do. But for the first couple of years that I was doing them illegally. You have to be licensed by the state of California, and I was too scared to refile for my license. Because you see, one of the questions on there is, have you ever been convicted of a felony? And I wouldn't lie and say no, but I just couldn't say yes. And finally, after 2 years, I realized something, and that was that I started to feel guilty, and I can't handle guilt. I'd gotten loaded for years over guilt, and I just can't handle guilt. And so I got hold of this application, and I filled it out, and I got to that question, have you ever been convicted of a felony? And I checked yes, and I panicked, and I called my sponsor, who was at the time an appellate court justice, you know, and I said to him, what do I do? And he said, you check the box yes, and you say, see a letter attached. He said, we can use Alcoholics Anonymous as a shield, not as a sword. You tell them in a letter what you used to be like, what happened, and what you're like today. That's all you can do. And that's what I did. And I wrote him this letter. And 6 weeks later, I got the license in the mail. I was amazed, you know. No congratulations, no what a guys, no glad you did it, none of that. They just sent me the license, you know. And that was all right. That was okay. 4.5 years ago, I did something I swore I would never do, and that was I walked into downtown Los Angeles in the criminal courts building, back into a courtroom. Actually in Judge Lance Ito's courtroom, you know, before he became famous, or infamous, or whatever the heck he is. But I walked into Lance's courtroom, applying for what's called a certificate of rehabilitation. It is the first step in being granted a pardon. And he granted me this thing, you know. They signed it and banged that gavel down one more time, only this time I wasn't going anywhere but home, you know. And it was incredible. I walked out of there, I walked the 3 blocks down to Don's office, his office was a few blocks away at that point, and I walked into his office and I was crying, and he said, "What are those tears of gratitude?" And I said, "No, man, I'm overwhelmed. I can't believe that I'm on the path for this to end." Now, theoretically, I doubt it, but theoretically, I'm supposed to have a pardon the end of this February or March. Because Wilson's not giving out too many pardons, you know. But let me tell you what a pardon will do for me. A pardon will allow me to own a rifle, never a handgun. Ex-con with a handgun's a no-no, you know. Never a handgun, but it will allow me to own a rifle and run for public office. And I'm actually thinking of doing both just for the heck of it, you know? I mean, you know, like junior college board or something. What are they going to do? Dig up dirt on me? Psh, it's a matter of public record, you know? But just for the, you know, just for the heck of it. 7 years ago, we went to our first international convention up in Seattle. I would have liked to have gone to Montreal in '85, but I was unavoidably detained on my sabbatical, you know, in the gated community, as I like to call it. But so we went to Seattle, which was our first international convention, and we went to a meeting that changed my life. It was one of the smaller meetings where they have about 1,000 or 1,200 people there, and this woman named Bibi got up. She was from New York, and I always give her credit. Even though I know in AA you only have to give credit twice and you can take it as your own, but I give Bibi credit. Bibi stood up and said 2 things that knocked me out. The first thing she said was, I am a victim of a victim of a victim. My grandmother was a victim, my mother was a victim, and I'm a victim. And it stops with me. My children are not victims. And I thought, whoa. Then the next thing she said was that I believe that God gives 3 answers, not 2. I've always felt God gave 2 answers. Yes and no. No is a viable answer. I've always refused to accept a no, so I stopped asking for anything specific. She said she believes God gives 3 answers. Yes, not now, and I have something better in store for you. Isn't that great? I loved it. I just loved it. I accepted it right away. What's happened to me in the 14 years that I've been sober is that I found that other than death or serious illness, I can walk through anything. I probably won't like the walk. I mean, I haven't liked any of the walks I've had to take, you know, and the results I've never been real crazy about. You know, I've gotten a lot of not nows, and I've gotten something better in store for you. But it doesn't make any difference, because the single most important thing about that is that I never have to make that walk alone. For that, I'll always be grateful. Thanks for listening.
Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with, and it's actually controlled through the iPhone through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst and one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.